So one of the best and most impressive aspects that the Far Cry series is known for are the open worlds that the games have. And now I played every Far Cry game and reviewed it on the channel in the last 6 months, so now it's time to compare the Far Cry games to one another. And in today's video I want to start with one of the most important aspects that an open world game can have: the open worlds. So I'll rank the open worlds from worst to best, and before I start the ranking I obviously have to say that this is my personal opinion. Probably almost everybody would have a different list, but obviously this video is going to be very subjective. So we start the list off with my least favorite open world in the Far Cry series, which is Hope County from Far Cry New Dawn. And I have to say that while this open world is the last one on the list today, it still is not bad in particular. So when it comes to the Far Cry games and the open worlds, it's really quite impressive on how unique the open worlds are. Because since the very first title from 2004, the series has really been revolutionizing the genre of open world shooters. And that unique approach that we find in so many Far Cry games was missing in Far Cry New Dawn. So obviously we know that this game is a sequel to Far Cry 5, only 17 years later after the events of the 5th Far Cry game. So we revisit the same map of Hope County in Montana, on one hand with far more restrictions and a smaller size, and on the other hand just an uglier Hope County than it was in Far Cry 5. And in the open world you kind of didn't really see any interesting points, because everything that we did see that was quite interesting we already knew from Far Cry 5. And that pink-blue tint that the open world had really didn't strike my nerve, and after playing the game I really thought to myself that this really should have been a DLC for Far Cry 5. It doesn't really offer much content, it's kind of the same map but recycled kind of, not refurbished because it's not better, recycled backwards kind of, and it didn't really live up to the expectations. So while the open world definitely isn't ugly, obviously none of the Far Cry games are really ugly if you think about it, but it's still the weakest open world for me. And on the 7th place on today's list are the South Pacific Islands from Far Cry 1. And now obviously it's quite unfair because this game is 20 years old, and the very first game in the Far Cry series was really a unique and innovative approach back then. But obviously if we compare it to other games in the franchise, the open world didn't really age well, because while the map is very immersive and beautiful, it really lacks the depth of newer titles of the game. You know, you can't really explore much there, and there aren't really a lot of interesting places. The environmental design, however, was really ahead of its time when you think about other games that came out in 2004. So while the South Pacific Islands are definitely very nice to look at and also very immersive, they still don't come close to other titles from the Far Cry series. However, it was enough to beat New Dawn's open world for me. So now in 6th place we have East Africa from Far Cry 2. And I have to say that I really liked the fact that the open world and the game itself pushed us to be real explorers, you know. You don't have a huge HUD, you don't really have a lot of distractions on your screen, you only really see the world of East Africa. And obviously the open world is full of threats, so you really have to watch out and be vigilant at all times, because some animal might come out of the bushes or people might attack you out of nowhere. So the open world of Far Cry 2 is definitely way less forgiving. However, despite the high levels of immersion that Far Cry 2 offers, it still kind of suffers from the same problems as Far Cry 1. The open world kind of feels very linear and you don't really see a lot of interesting sights. Everything looks kind of the same and you don't really have a lot of memorable locations from the open world. So while Far Cry 2 definitely had a lot of great points, the open world was not really one of them. However, I still like the fact that the distractions on our screen were so small and that we could really discover the open world like in real life. Also on number 5 we have the Rook Islands from Far Cry 3. And now Far Cry 3 is definitely one of the best games in the whole franchise, and it kind of marked the beginning of a whole new era because it kind of created this formula that would be followed by future games. The open world also had some great additions to it. On one hand, I firstly have to say that this game introduced the outpost system, which has been a big part of the Far Cry series since, and one of my favorite activities that you can do in a Far Cry game. And the world of the Rook Islands really is a very visually stunning environment. And the tropical islands from Far Cry 3 really provide the perfect backdrop to match the vibe of the game. However, while the game has as many strengths as it has, my problem with the open world was that, again, you didn't really have any outstanding locations there. I mean, I get it, it's a pirate island, what are you going to expect? But it's just so stale and similar, and to be honest, sometimes The open world feels very generated, like you don't really see that actual people created this open world. However, looking at it, it looks still amazing, so that why it was enough for place 5 on the list. So the next open world is one of the newest Far Cry game, and we're talking about Yara from Far Cry 6. And while I did say that I think that Far Cry 6 was the right step in the right direction for the Far Cry franchise, I also told you that a big part of why I like this game so much was the open world. Because when you look at the pictures on your screen, it really looks amazing, and it does have an outstanding atmosphere. You're not just roaming through the open world or discovering the forest of the game, it definitely has a great visual aspect. However, it still has some flaws that I noticed quite easily. On one hand, Yara still felt very empty and kind of without life for a world that is in a revolution. You know, when you think about a world like that, you would think that you would see some gunfights on the roads, or just more people in the villages, and even Esperanza kind of didn't feel like a proper city, it felt more like an empty maze that you had to discover. And with Esperanza being the first capital city of a Far Cry game, I would have really liked to see more life or just more of a city vibe in there, because it didn't really feel real for me. So now we're getting to the top of the list, and on number 3 we have Hope County from Far Cry 5. And right from the get-go, I really have to say that Hope County kind of feels very home-like, and even though I have unfortunately never been to America, it kind of felt very familiar and known to me. And obviously the world in this game is very unique in the series. You know, we had all these exotic locations, and now we were just put into a fictional town that looked like straight out of Montana. And while Ubisoft obviously took a very big risk on deciding to go to a location like that, I still have to say that they managed to do that very well. You know, we can really immerse ourselves in this American world, and obviously we don't have to talk about how visually stunning it looks. Because sometimes you could really think that you are looking at real life pictures and that the open world isn't even a game. So now we have only 2 open worlds left, and I have to tell you that I was not certain which of these open worlds I should put at first place and not second place. Because they're both so incredible, but in the end I decided that on second place will be Kyrat from Far Cry 4. And Kyrat is an absolute visual beauty and looks really like out of a picture. And while the game does feature some flaws when it comes to the storyline, the open world is really the part where it shines the most. And I think that it is also the most known, because when somebody thinks about Far Cry open worlds, almost everybody would think about Kyrat. It is just so visually stunning, something that we didn't see like that in the series before. And flying through the skies with your wingsuit in Kyrat was an amazing experience, and it was a lot of fun to immerse ourselves into this amazing open world. So now on number 1, my favorite open world out of the Far Cry series is Oros from Far Cry Primal. And this game is one of the most unique games that I have ever played in my life. Because how often are we able to explore the Stone Age like we did in Far Cry Primal? And I have to say that from the first time that I played Far Cry Primal, I simply fell in love with the open world of the game. You know, it doesn't feature any weapons, it doesn't feature any vehicles, no radio towers, but to be honest, I didn't miss that at all. It had this incredible atmosphere that was both raw and beautiful, and the game really showed us how beautiful the world that we live in truly is. And obviously this game doesn't feature any big cities, and it doesn't have the most interesting story, but experiencing an open world unlike any other was an incredible experience, and the world is really designed with great attention to detail, and is one of my favorite open worlds of all time. Because I played this game for the first time in 2016 when it came out, and 7 years later, the Far Cry game that I wanted to replay the most really was Far Cry Primal, and simply because of the open world and the atmosphere that the game offered. And as I already mentioned in my review of Far Cry Primal, this game definitely is the most underrated game in the Far Cry franchise for me. And while Oros definitely is unlike any other open world in the Far Cry series and in almost any game, to be honest, I am gladly putting it on top of the best Far Cry open worlds. But as I said in the beginning, this list is very subjective and it's only my opinion. So now it's your turn. I really want to know what your favorite open worlds are from the Far Cry series and what would you put at first place. I can imagine not as many people would put Far Cry Primal on top of the list, so I'm very interested in seeing your favorite open worlds from the Far Cry series. And in the upcoming weeks I'll be comparing the Far Cry games more and more, talking about things like the antagonists or the most interesting people in the games, so feel free to subscribe if you also love open world games like the Far Cry series. But that was it from me guys in today's video. I wish you all an amazing day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.